Now that we have the HTML and the CSS set up for our clock, we're ready to get started with our JavaScript. So the very first thing that I need to do is I need to link out to my JavaScript file. I've already made a file. It's blank currently. So I'm going to go ahead and make a script tag in my head section right now. And I'll go ahead and set the source attribute to point to that file. And I'm going to go ahead and add the defer attribute. When we use the defer attribute, it tells the browser to defer the execution of the JavaScript file until the HTML document has been parsed. When a browser encounters a script tag with the defer attribute, it's going to continue to load and render all of the page elements, and then it's going to execute the deferred script after the page has finished parsing. So this is important because we want to make sure that all of the elements exist on our page before the JavaScript actually gets loaded, because we're going to be manipulating the page elements with the JavaScript. Defer allows the file to be loaded and parsed in the background while the rest of the page is being rendered. And the execution of the JavaScript file is deferred until after the page has finished parsing. This can definitely help to speed up the initial load time of the page. And it's also worth mentioning that the defer attribute only works with external scripts. It will not have any effect on inline scripts or scripts that are loaded dynamically using JavaScript. When you use defer, it can be a good way to improve the performance of your web pages and reduce the amount of time it takes to load and render the page. But it is important to keep in mind that there are some browsers that do not support the defer attribute, and some browsers may interpret it differently. So it's always a good idea to test your pages in a variety of browsers and make sure that they're all executing in the appropriate way. Now that we have the path to the JavaScript file, let's jump into our JavaScript. And I always like to start by just doing like a console.log just to make sure that the JavaScript is loaded. So I'm just going to do a console.log. We'll save our page. And if we refresh in the browser and open up our console, and you can see that I'm getting an error. Obviously I didn't spell console right, so let's just correct that. We'll refresh, and now you can see that the JavaScript is connecting. That is something that I just want to test and make sure that everything is working in the way that I expect it to. And I'll just leave my console open at the bottom of the page just in case we want to use this. So I actually don't need this. I'm just going to get rid of it. But I think it's a good idea, especially when you're starting with JavaScript, just to verify that. The first thing that I want to do here is we're going to be using JavaScript to move the clock hands. We're going to start off by creating 3 constants, one for our hour hand, and we're going to make this equal to document.querySelector. The query selector is a method that allows you to select DOM elements from the HTML document using CSS style selectors. And the query selector is always going to return the first matching element that it finds within the DOM. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put #hour, which is the name that we assigned for this particular element. And I'm just going to copy this. We basically want to do the same thing, but we're going to change this to our minute hand, and I want it to select the minute element, and then finally we'll do the same thing for the second hand, and we want it to select a second. From here, I'm going to create 3 more variables. I'll use let instead of constant for this. These variables are going to contain the degrees that we want to turn each of the arms. Let's just set this to some random numbers now. It doesn't really matter what they are. We're going to use a different method to actually change them, but we can just kind of set this so that we can see that it works. So I'm just going to set the hour position to 20, the minute position to 130, and the second position can just be 268. Ultimately, we're going to be using some math to change these and make sure that they correspond with the actual time, but we'll do that a little bit later. It is worth mentioning here that I am using let, and let is block scoped, which means that variables that we create with the let keyword are going to be available inside the block that they were created in, as well as any nested blocks. because I'm just making this at the root of my JavaScript file, they're going to be available anywhere. We used constant for the first set of variables, and the difference is that once we assign a value to a constant, we can't reassign a new value. But these position variables are going to change based on the appropriate values, so we don't want to use constant for those. And then finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply these numbers as degrees in the inline styles for transform on each of my objects. So we're going to do this with JavaScript. I'm going to use the constant name of our hand in this case. I'm going to use the style.transform. Those are the properties I want to affect. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to specify that we want to rotate. And then in parentheses, I'm going to go ahead and use another set of quotes. And I'm going to concatenate in the HR position, and then we'll say plus, and then I'm going to have it be degree, and I don't need this last quote right there. So that's going to be my first statement. And if I save this and we refresh, we should see that our hand now moved 20 degrees, which is what we want. And we're just going to do the same sort of thing for the other two arms. And I'll just go ahead and log to the console so we can actually see the values. So when I refresh my page, all of the arms on the console are going to move. And it looks like I have an error right here. Oh, you can see on my let, I had a capital O. That is not what I wanted. So let me just make that lowercase. And using the console is always helpful because it'll help you to find those things. So now the arms have moved in the appropriate way. And if we go into the console and we open these up and we go ahead, and these are all different sorts of properties, I'm going to go down to style. And if we open style, and again, we're going to have to scroll way down because these are all style related properties, and get down here to transform, you can see that the rotate property has been set to 20 degrees. And that is going to reflect what we wrote inside our code. So we know that that is all functioning in the manner that we expect it to. So that is great. That's the first step that we're going to do here. And in the next exercise, we're going to go ahead and get the actual current hour, minute, and second, and we'll go ahead and integrate this into our project.